My name is Evan Carter, and I was 28 when my grandfather died, a man I barely knew but who somehow shaped every shadow in my life. While my cousins celebrated their $41 million inheritance, I stood there at his funeral clutching a crumpled envelope like it was a cruel joke. Inside was a single plane ticket. Destination, Amalfi, Italy. No explanation, no message, just a ticket and my name written in his shaky handwriting. My cousin Grayson actually doubled over laughing when I opened it. "Oh man, this is priceless. Grandpa left you a vacation while we got the empire. Guess even in death, he's still got a sense of humor." The room roared with laughter. I didn't. Because even then, something about that ticket felt heavier than paper should. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. The funeral itself was exactly the kind of theatrical event my grandfather, Harrison Carter, would have staged. Rows of black limousines lined up like soldiers, a sea of dark suits, expensive perfume, and hollow condolences. He'd built half of Boston's skyline, Carter Holdings, a name etched in glass and steel. Politicians, CEOs, and society's upper crust filled the marble-floored hall that afternoon, speaking in soft, reverent tones about the legendary visionary. But behind the marble smiles, everyone was there for one reason: the will. My cousins, Grayson and Lila, played the parts perfectly. Grayson, in his tailored Armani suit, greeting guests like he'd already inherited the kingdom. "Senator Keene, so good of you to come." Grandfather would have been honored. His voice had that smug polish that came from being told you're destined for greatness since birth. Lila, on the other hand, live-streamed her grief. Literally. Tears, filters, hashtags, #RIP legend. Her designer dress was worth more than my car, and every sniffle came with a side glance to her camera. And then there was me. Evan, the high school science teacher who couldn't even afford the parking fee at the cemetery. The grandson who got 5 phone calls in his entire life from the man whose empire funded half of Massachusetts. My mom, Diane, found me near the kitchen door, half hiding. She was the youngest of Grandpa Harrison's 3 children, and the family's quiet shame for marrying my dad, Cal, a carpenter. She straightened my tie, smiled softly, and said, "You doing okay, honey?" "Fine," I lied. "Just ready for this show to end." My father joined us, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He hated champagne. "They're about to read the will," he said, his voice steady but tight. "We'll leave right after, yeah?" I nodded. I didn't know that what was coming next would begin everything. The reading took place in Harrison's study, a cathedral of leather and mahogany that smelled like cigars and arrogance. The family gathered. Grayson dropped into the biggest chair near the lawyer's desk, already on his phone, probably checking his portfolio. Lila perched on a velvet couch, reapplying lipstick while her assistant filmed, for the memories. My mom stood beside my dad, clutching his hand so tightly her knuckles went white. The lawyer, Mr. Hollander, adjusted his glasses. "We'll begin." Grayson smirked at me. "Hey, Ev, maybe Grandpa left you one of his old lab beakers." Lila giggled. "Or maybe a lifetime supply of chalk for your little school." I said nothing. I'd learned long ago that silence was safer than trying to speak in this family. "First," Hollander said, opening a thick envelope embossed with gold lettering, "to my grandson, Grayson Carter." Grayson leaned forward like a predator scenting blood. "I leave my holdings in downtown Boston, including the Carter Tower, Lexington Complex, and Seaview Marina Development, valued collectively at $23 million. Grayson's grin was wolfish. I knew he'd see potential where it counts. Hollander continued, "Additionally, I leave him my collection of vintage automobiles, the 1961 Ferrari 250, the 1957 Porsche Spyder, and all associated assets." "The Ferrari?" Grayson almost shouted. "That's worth millions on its own." "Unreal." Lila clapped. "Well deserved, Gray. You'll look great behind the wheel of Grandpa's midlife crisis." The lawyer ignored her and opened the next envelope. "To my granddaughter, Lila Carter, whose modern influence has brought visibility to the Carter name. Of course. She'd turned our family name into a brand. I leave my properties in the Hamptons, valued at $18 million, and my fleet of yachts, including the Ocean Muse, the Seraph, and the Silver Horizon." Lila gasped. "Oh my God, that's 3 yachts." "3. Grandpa, you iconic legend." Her assistant zoomed in on her, genuine reaction. Then came my mother. "To my daughter, Diane, I leave $100,000 and my first edition book collection, with the hope that she may find wisdom within their pages." A polite slap in the face. My mom smiled anyway. "Thank you, Father," she said softly. Grace under fire, she'd mastered it long ago. Then Hollander lifted a final, wrinkled envelope, the kind you'd find at the bottom of a drawer. And lastly, to my grandson, Evan Carter. Every sound in the room died. He handed me the envelope. My name was scrawled on it, shaky and uneven. I opened it slowly. Inside, just one thing, a plane ticket. Boston to Naples, Italy, connection to Amalfi. The flight was for tomorrow morning. No note. No explanation. Just a single scribble on the corner of the paper. First class. Don't miss the flight. For 3 full seconds, no one breathed. Then Grayson broke into laughter. You're kidding me. A plane ticket? Grandpa left him a vacation? He was practically crying. Oh, that's rich. Lila leaned in, laughing too hard. Maybe there's a hotel reservation too, a whole weekend package. Don't forget sunscreen, Evan. Their laughter echoed in that expensive, suffocating room. My father's jaw tightened. That's enough, he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. You've had your fun. Grayson scoffed. Come on, Cal. It's a joke. He got a ticket, we got estates. Don't take it personally. Everything about this family is personal, Dad muttered. But I barely heard them. I just kept staring at the ticket. Naples. Amalfi. Tomorrow. Grandfather's last command. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, turning the ticket over and over like it might reveal a secret if I looked long enough. The periodic table poster still hung on the wall. My old science trophies gathered dust. It felt like the ticket didn't belong here, like it was a tear in the fabric of my ordinary life. Dad knocked softly before coming in, holding 2 open bottles of beer. You don't have to go, he said, sitting beside me. He's playing games, even in death. Don't let him pull your strings. Mom appeared in the doorway, her face calm but eyes thoughtful. I think you should go, she said. Dad frowned. Diane, he humiliated him in front of everyone. He separated him, she said. That's not humiliation. That's intention. She looked down at the ticket and whispered, your grandfather never did anything without purpose. And that was the first moment I felt it. The pull of something bigger than a cruel joke. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather's handwriting, sharp, hurried, deliberate. First class. Don't miss the flight. It wasn't a note, it was a command. And if there was one thing Harrison Carter never did, it was speak without purpose. By dawn, my mind was made up. I was going. When I walked into the kitchen, my mom was already packing a small carry-on. Fresh shirts, my passport, my old wristwatch. She didn't say a word, just smiled, that quiet kind of proud smile mothers give when they know something's about to change. Dad poured coffee into a thermos and set it on the table. I still think it's ridiculous, he said, but his tone had softened overnight. If this turns out to be another one of his mind games, then I'll come home, I said. But if it isn't? He sighed, rubbing his face. If it isn't, maybe you'll finally get answers none of us ever did. We left for Logan Airport before sunrise. The truck smelled like sawdust and engine oil, same as always. The radio hummed with some old Eagles song, and for a few miles, none of us spoke. At the departure's drop-off, Mom handed me the packed bag and fixed my collar. If this leads nowhere, you'll still have seen Italy, she said softly. Dad's hand landed on my shoulder, firm, warm. Whatever you find or don't find, you're already enough, kid. I nodded, swallowed hard, and walked toward the terminal. Before stepping through the doors, I turned back. Mom waved, Dad gave me a thumbs up, the same one he used to give me before baseball games. For a moment, I was just Evan, the teacher, the son, not the grandson of a man who'd built empires and left his final words wrapped in mystery. At the gate, I stared at the ticket again. Boston to Naples, then to Amalfi. Even the print felt strange, like it had been typed on an old machine instead of a modern booking system. When the attendant scanned it, she smiled. Amalfi, huh? Beautiful this time of year. Business or pleasure? I honestly don't know, I said. She laughed, thinking it was a joke. I didn't. First class felt like another planet, reclining seats, champagne flutes, a quiet hum of wealth. I didn't belong there. But that was the thing about the Carters, I'd never belonged anywhere near them, yet here I was, flying halfway across the world because of one. 8 hours later, the plane descended over the glittering Italian coast. I pressed my forehead to the window. The water below shimmered like melted sapphire, sunlight bouncing off cliffside villas and cobblestone rooftops. It was almost hard to believe this was the same world that had mocked me 24 hours earlier. The connection from Naples to Amalfi was short, a small private charter flight arranged under my name. That detail alone made me uneasy. Who booked it? Who expected me? When we landed, the salty breeze hit me like a memory from a life I'd never lived. Then I saw him. A tall man in a charcoal gray suit, standing by the arrival's exit, holding a placard that read, Mr. Evan Carter. His posture was military-level straight, his silver hair neatly combed. Everything about him screamed precision. I hesitated before approaching. "That's me," I said cautiously. "Evan Carter." He looked up, eyes a sharp glacial blue. "Welcome, Mr. Carter," he said with a light accent, Italian, but refined. "I've been expecting you." "Expecting me?" I asked. "By who?" He lowered the sign, stepping closer until his voice dropped. "By the man who left you this ticket." That stopped me cold. "You mean my grandfather?" He nodded once. In Amalfi, he was not known as Harrison Carter. His voice softened. Here, he was Lorenzo Castaigne, founder of the Castaigne Foundation. I blinked. "That's not possible. Harrison Carter was a real estate mogul, not—" "Please," he interrupted gently. "This is not the place to discuss such things. Come with me." Outside, a black Bentley waited, the kind of car I'd only ever seen in movies. The driver opened the door without a word. Everything in me screamed not to get in, every true crime podcast, every cautionary instinct. But something deeper, quieter, told me I had to. The suited man extended his hand. "My name is Vincenzo Marini. I was your grandfather's legal representative and the director of his philanthropic foundation. He spoke of you often." I stared. He barely spoke to me at all. Vincenzo's expression barely shifted, but his eyes said something else. Perhaps not in words. As the car pulled away from the airport, I realized this was no sightseeing trip. The Amalfi Coast unfolded before me like a dream, narrow roads carved into cliffs, bougainvillea spilling over balconies, the sea stretching endlessly blue below. It felt unreal. Finally, Vincenzo spoke again. "Your grandfather began the Castaigne Foundation over 40 years ago. Its purpose was humanitarian, education, healthcare, rebuilding communities destroyed by poverty and war. In America, he built towers. Here, he built hope." I turned to him. "You expect me to believe that the same man who cut off his own daughter because she married a carpenter spent his life helping strangers?" Vincenzo smiled faintly. "He was many men, Mr. Carter. Perhaps too many. But one of them, the one he became here, wanted you to know him." He tapped his tablet, pulling up an old photo. My breath caught. It was my grandfather, younger, smiling, wearing simple clothes. Not the tailored suits I remembered. He was standing in front of a newly built school, surrounded by children holding notebooks. "He called this place La Rinascita, the rebirth," Vincenzo said. "The first of many." My pulse pounded in my ears. Why didn't anyone know about this? "Because," he said quietly, "the Harrison Carter you knew, the one America worshipped, couldn't afford to be seen as a man with a conscience. Here, he was Lorenzo. Here, he lived without walls." The car slowed as we climbed a steep hillside road. At the top stood a villa, white stone, arching terraces, and gardens spilling down toward the sea. It looked like something out of another century. "This was his home," Vincenzo said as the gates opened automatically. "He built it himself. Every corner holds a part of his truth." Inside, I stopped cold. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds of them. Grandfather shaking hands with doctors, hugging children, building wells, standing beside relief workers. He wasn't posing, he was present. Vincenzo's voice softened behind me. He called this his atonement. I turned slowly. "Atonement for what?" "For everything he built on the other side," Vincenzo said. "The empire he left behind, the one your cousins now rule." My throat felt dry. "And why me? Why send me here?" Vincenzo reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black journal. "Because he believed you'd understand. That you'd see the value beyond the dollar." I took it. The cover was worn, the pages thick. Inside, his handwriting. I flipped to the first entry. "Watched Grayson close another deal today." He smiled when the layoffs were announced. I felt pride, for 5 minutes. Then disgust for 5 hours. Another entry. "Evan teaches chemistry. Stayed after hours to help a student he doesn't know well. Reminds me of who I was before the money." My heart stuttered. He'd been watching me? Vincenzo nodded at my expression. "He knew more about you than you think. And now, he's left you with a choice." As I looked out at the golden sunset spilling over the Amalfi cliffs, one thought echoed louder than the waves below. I hadn't been left out. I'd been chosen. The villa felt alive. Not haunted, not eerie, but breathing. Every photo, every artifact on the wall seemed to hum with a kind of memory, a quiet pulse of something unfinished. I followed Vincenzo through sunlit halls, the sound of the sea echoing faintly through open windows. This place was his refuge, Vincenzo said. He called it Casa della Rinascita, House of Renewal. He spent his final years here. I traced my fingers over a photograph, my grandfather, smiling beside a group of young women in school uniforms, their hands stained with paint. The plaque beneath read, "The first graduating class, Kenya, 2004. He funded all this? I asked. Vincenzo nodded. And more. Hospitals in Ghana. Libraries in Peru. Water projects in India. Each one in secrecy. It didn't make sense. The man I knew, or thought I knew, was ruthless, calculating, emotionally absent. He'd once told my mother love was for people who could afford to fail. How did no one ever find out? I asked. Because he made sure they couldn't, Vincenzo replied. He separated his identities completely. The Carter Empire and the Castaigne Foundation were never allowed to meet. He led me into what looked like a study. A long mahogany desk faced a massive arched window that framed the coastline like a painting. This, Vincenzo said, was where he worked. Every donation, every letter, every note passed through this room. I picked up a stack of papers. They were blueprints, schools, clinics, housing projects, all meticulously annotated in his handwriting. The man who'd barely written my mother a birthday card had written thousands of words here. What was he trying to do? I asked quietly. Vincenzo looked out the window. Balance the scales, perhaps. Money corrupts men in different ways. He built his empire on ambition. But here, he tried to build something on repentance. The word repentance hung in the air like incense. On a low shelf near the desk sat a row of leather journals, dozens of them. May I? I asked. Vincenzo gestured for me to go ahead. I opened one. The first page read, 2003, the year I started to see clearly. I turned the page. Today, I met a boy in Nairobi who had my father's eyes. He was dying because his family couldn't afford treatment that would have cost me less than a weekend in the Hamptons. I sent money. It felt like bloodletting. The guilt didn't fade, but the weight shifted. Another page. Lila posted another photo on my yacht. She called it generational wealth. I call it generational blindness. My throat tightened. Every word peeled back a layer I didn't know existed. Then I found one that stopped me cold. Evan Carter. Teacher. Brooklyn Public High. Stayed after class to help a struggling student with chemistry. He spent his own money to replace broken lab glassware. I see myself in him before I became lost. He builds, not destroys. Maybe there's hope in him. I sank into the leather chair, the journal heavy in my hands. He knew, I said. He was watching me? Vincenzo nodded. Not surveillance. Observation. Pride. He wanted to see if you'd choose meaning over money. I laughed bitterly. So this was a test? Vincenzo smiled faintly. No. This was an answer. We spent the next several hours walking through the villa. Each room told another part of the story. The dining hall was lined with photos of clean water wells in Africa. The library shelves groaned under the weight of books on philosophy, ethics, and architecture. The guest rooms were filled with art made by children, hand-painted murals, crayon drawings, poems scribbled on paper. This foundation, Vincenzo said, was not just charity. It was a parallel empire, one built on purpose. He paused beside a door marked Archivio. The archive, he said, unlocking it. This is where everything is kept. Inside were filing cabinets stretching from floor to ceiling. Dozens of binders labeled by country, project, and year. This, Vincenzo said softly, is what he left behind. Not gold, not property, impact. The value of these records cannot be measured in currency. At the far end of the room, a single desk held a sealed envelope. My name, Evan Carter, written in that same familiar handwriting. My pulse quickened. For you, Vincenzo said simply. He instructed that it be opened only when you arrived. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a letter, written in neat, steady lines. My dearest Evan, if you're reading this, it means you came. That alone tells me what I needed to know, that curiosity and conscience still live in you. You will hear stories about Harrison Carter, the man who built towers of glass and steel. But here, in Amalfi, I was Lorenzo. I built something different, invisible, but lasting. I kept my distance not because I didn't care, but because I feared that caring openly would poison what I saw in you. You are your mother's compassion and your father's integrity, a balance I never achieved. You'll soon understand the choice before you, return to America, or stay and continue what I began. The foundation is yours now, if you want it. But remember, Evan, wealth is a mirror. It reveals who we are. I saw monsters in mine. I hope you see something better. Harrison Carter, Lorenzo Castaigne. By the time I finished reading, my eyes were stinging. He wanted me to take over? I whispered. Vincenzo nodded. He believed you could carry both worlds, the intellect of a builder, and the heart of a teacher. I leaned against the desk, the letter trembling in my hands. And if I say no? Then the foundation dissolves, Vincenzo said simply. Its assets will be absorbed by other charities, still good work, but not guided by his vision. I stared out the window. The sea below shimmered like liquid gold, waves breaking softly against the cliffs. He really left all this to me? I said finally. Not to you, Vincenzo corrected gently. For you. Later that evening, I wandered out to the villa's terrace. The air was warm, the scent of lemon trees drifting on the breeze. From here, I could see the entire coastline, terracotta rooftops, boats swaying gently in the water, the horizon blurring into 1,000 shades of blue. My phone buzzed. A text from Grayson. Hope you're enjoying your vacation, Professor. Don't forget to send a postcard. We're celebrating our inheritance tonight with a $10,000 bottle of wine. Guess you'll be grading papers instead. LOL. I stared at the message, then laughed quietly to myself. They had no idea. No idea that I was standing in a house worth more than all their estates combined. No idea that I'd just been handed a legacy bigger than wealth, one that might actually mean something. I typed back one line. Enjoy your wine. I found something priceless. Then I deleted it before hitting send. Because some things, some truths, weren't meant to be shared. That night, I fell asleep in one of the guest rooms, surrounded by the hum of the Mediterranean wind. In my dreams, I saw my grandfather not as a cold, distant man behind a desk, but as the figure in the photographs, smiling, weathered, human. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small in his shadow. I felt seen. The morning light in Amalfi was almost too perfect, the kind of light that made even pain look beautiful. I woke to the sound of waves and church bells, the scent of coffee drifting from the terrace below. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the leather journal on the nightstand, my grandfather's handwriting staring back at me, and it all came flooding back. I poured coffee and sat by the open window, reading the next entry in the journal. I've built towers so high I can no longer see the ground. Grayson and Lila are climbing them, believing height equals worth. Evan remains on the ground, and perhaps that's where the view is clearest. I closed the book, my chest tightening. It was strange, the more I learned about him, the less angry I felt. After breakfast, Vincenzo found me standing in the garden, where lemon trees bent under the weight of fruit. He handed me a folder. He wanted you to see this. Inside were documents, legal papers, financial ledgers, a notarized statement. The first line stopped me cold. Upon my passing, all assets of the Castaigne Foundation transfer to my grandson, Evan Carter, in perpetuity. I blinked. Wait, this is real? Vincenzo nodded. Every cent, roughly 400 million euros in endowment. It generates about 20 million annually, all dedicated to humanitarian work. I felt dizzy. I'm a teacher, Vincenzo. I can barely balance my checking account. That, he said simply, is why he chose you. He motioned toward a nearby bench, and he could have given it to your cousins, the empire builders, the socialites. But he knew what they would do, destroy it. You, however, build people. He saw that. His words hit deeper than I expected. So what happens if I walk away? Then the foundation will close within a year, Vincenzo said. It would be redistributed, its heart lost. He wanted it guided, not managed. I stared out over the cliffs. He really believed I could do this? He did, Vincenzo said. But you must decide if you believe it too. The rest of the day passed in quiet reflection. I walked the villa's halls again, stopping by the photographs I'd barely noticed before. One showed my grandfather in a refugee camp, holding a child no older than 5. Another, him standing in a rainstorm beside a half-built hospital. His clothes were muddy. His face unguarded. It was the first time I saw him look alive. I thought of the version of him I'd known, cold, powerful, unreachable. Maybe that version wasn't him at all. Maybe that was his penance. In the courtyard, I found Vincenzo speaking with a group of local staff, translators, administrators, caretakers, all of whom had worked under my grandfather for years. When he introduced me, they didn't bow or act formal. They smiled warmly, each one saying the same thing in accented English. Benvenuto a casa. Welcome home. That was when I realized this wasn't just about inheriting a foundation. It was about inheriting redemption. Later that afternoon, Vincenzo led me to the villa's basement, where rows of boxes were neatly stacked and labeled. These are the unrecorded years, he said. Projects that were never announced publicly. Only he and I knew of them. One box, labeled personal, caught my eye. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed to me, my mother, even my father. None had ever been mailed. I opened one. It was dated 7 years ago. I wanted to call Diane tonight, but I didn't. I watched her son online. He won an award for teaching. The The school posted photos. He looked happy. I've never known how to say I'm proud without ruining what I touch. Another one. Evan spoke at a science fair. The video reached me through an old business partner's daughter. His voice shook at first, but by the end, he had every kid in the room believing they could change the world. That was the day I knew he'd change mine. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling something break open inside me. Vincenzo stayed silent, giving me space. When I looked up, my eyes were wet. He watched me, all that time? Yes, Vincenzo said softly. And every report that came to him ended the same way: he has not become one of them. I laughed quietly, tears stinging. He thought I'd turn into a Carter. He feared it, Vincenzo said. That's why he kept you away. To protect what was still good. That night, I stood on the villa's terrace again. Below, the waves shimmered silver in the moonlight. I thought about the students waiting for me back in Boston, kids who didn't know they'd already changed my life. I thought about my mother, who'd raised me to believe kindness wasn't weakness. And I thought about my grandfather, a man split between two worlds, trying desperately to fix one by building the other. I picked up my phone. A new message blinked from Grayson. Heard you're still in Italy. How's the free trip? Don't get used to it, Teach. Some of us have real business to run. I stared at it for a long moment. Then typed back. Business looks different from here. And hit send. The next morning, Vincenzo met me in the study. You've had a night to think, he said. What will you do? I looked down at the foundation papers, hundreds of pages of assets, accounts, plans, schools, lives. I'll take it, I said quietly. But on my terms. Vincenzo tilted his head. Meaning? I'm not leaving my students. They're my purpose. I'll spend summers here, handle operations remotely during the school year. I want the foundation to stay anonymous, no headlines, no recognition. Just work that matters. Vincenzo smiled for the first time, not politely, but genuinely. He predicted you'd say that. He walked to a drawer and pulled out a folded document. It was another handwritten note. Evan will want to keep teaching. Let him. A teacher who becomes a philanthropist will change the world. A philanthropist who remains a teacher will save it. I laughed softly, shaking my head. He really planned everything, didn't he? He always did, Vincenzo said. But this time, his plan was love. That evening, we went over the details. He showed me the digital systems, the partners, the network of schools. By the end of it, my head was spinning, but my heart was clear. This was it. This was what the crumpled envelope had meant. The ticket wasn't an insult. It was a map. Before going to bed, I returned to the archive room one last time. There, tucked behind the last row of journals, I found one final book, smaller than the rest, bound in deep brown leather. It had my name on the cover. Inside, a single sentence. You got what they could not see, the invisible inheritance. I smiled. For the first time, I understood what he meant. The next morning, as the sun rose over Amalfi, I stood on the balcony, the air warm and golden. For years, I'd thought my grandfather had given me nothing. Now, I realized he'd given me everything that mattered. He'd given me the chance to matter. The flight home felt different. Not just because I was leaving Amalfi, but because I wasn't the same man who'd arrived there with a crumpled envelope and a bruised ego. I stared out the window as the coastline disappeared beneath the clouds. The Mediterranean glittered below like 1,000 tiny promises. When I landed in Boston, the air was sharp and gray, a shock after Amalfi's warmth. My parents were waiting at arrivals. Mom ran into me first, hugging me like she used to when I was little. You're okay, she said, tears in her eyes. Dad's hug was quieter but stronger. You found something, didn't you? He asked. I smiled faintly. Yeah. I did. They didn't press. They didn't need to. Back home, my life slipped back into rhythm, or at least, it looked like it did. I returned to my classroom at Jefferson High, where the fluorescent lights buzzed, the lab tables wobbled, and the coffee tasted like burnt regret. But something had shifted. I saw everything differently, the tired faces of students who carried more weight than they should, the way they lit up when they understood something, the quiet resilience they didn't even realize they had. The world hadn't changed. I had. A few weeks later, I emailed Vincenzo from the teacher's lounge. Let's start small, equipment for the school lab, scholarships for kids who need it, nothing flashy. Quiet impact. He replied within minutes. Understood. Discretion will be maintained. Lorenzo would be proud. And so it began. By spring break, Jefferson High had brand new lab equipment, Bunsen burners, spectrometers, even a 3D molecular model kit. Nobody knew where it came from. The school board credited a private donor. 2 months later, a new scholarship appeared, the Carter Initiative for Scientific Promise, full funding for underprivileged students who wanted to study chemistry or biology. The application didn't even require a GPA threshold, just a personal essay about curiosity. My students asked me about it, half joking. "Mr. Carter, you think I could apply?" "I think you should," I said. "Every one of you should." I read every essay myself. They weren't polished, but they were raw, honest. Some wrote about wanting to find a cure for diseases that took their parents. Others wrote about wanting to understand the world because it was the only thing that made sense. Those essays reminded me why I'd chosen teaching in the first place. By summer, I flew back to Amalfi. Vincenzo greeted me at the villa with that same calm precision. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," he said. "Please," I told him. "Just Evan." We spent long hours going over project proposals, new schools in Cambodia, healthcare grants in Kenya, clean water systems in Guatemala. Every document represented lives that would change. Every dollar had purpose. That night, over dinner, Vincenzo poured a glass of red wine and raised it. "To your grandfather," he said. "And to you, for continuing his quiet revolution." I looked out over the sea. "He built an empire out of guilt," I said. "I want to build one out of gratitude." Vincenzo smiled. "Then you already honor him." When I returned to Boston in the fall, nobody suspected anything. I was still the same chemistry teacher who stayed late after class, the one whose tie was always crooked and whose coffee cup read "World's okayest teacher." But behind the scenes, the foundation was thriving. A small hospital in Uganda received funding for pediatric heart surgeries. A group of girls in Myanmar got their first science lab. An entire village in Peru gained access to clean water. And back home, my students were starting to dream bigger. One afternoon, Maria, one of my brightest seniors, came to my desk holding an envelope. "I got in," she whispered. "Full ride to Stanford." "That's incredible," I said, standing up to hug her. "You earned it." She smiled through tears. "I couldn't have done it without that new scholarship. Whoever started it, tell them thank you, okay?" I did. Just not out loud. Meanwhile, Grayson and Lila were all over the news. Grayson had over-leveraged his inheritance on risky real estate deals in Miami. By winter, his company filed for bankruptcy. Lila had turned one of her inherited mansions into a content villa for influencers. A fire broke out during a live stream, destroying half the property. Insurance refused to cover it because it was used for commercial filming. They blamed everyone but themselves. But I didn't feel satisfaction. Just pity. They'd gotten everything visible, and lost everything invisible. One Sunday evening, Mom invited the whole family over for dinner. Grayson and Lila came too, more out of obligation than desire. The table felt like a reunion and a war zone all at once. "So," Grayson said, pouring himself wine, "how was your little European adventure, Teach? Find any hidden treasure in those Amalfi cliffs?" I smiled. "Something like that." Lila snorted. "You're so mysterious. Bet Grandpa just left you some old books or something." "Maybe," I said. "But they were good ones." Mom gave me a look, that quiet, knowing look that said she understood everything without a word. Dad refilled my glass and murmured, "You're different, son." "I guess I finally know where I came from," I said. 6 months later, the foundation funded 12 new schools across Asia. None bore my name. None bore his. They simply carried a small engraved phrase on their gates. "Built by those who choose to matter." Vincenzo sent me photos of smiling children standing beneath that sign. I saved every single one. At night, I'd sometimes pull open my desk drawer and look at the crumpled envelope, the one my cousins had laughed at, the one that had started everything. It was creased, faded, fragile, but it meant more to me than any deed or check ever could. One rainy evening, while grading papers, I got an email from Vincenzo. The subject line read, "Final entry found." Inside was a scanned page from my grandfather's last journal. Asterisk, Evan will never know how close I came to leaving him nothing. I feared giving him money would corrupt him like it did the others. But then I realized, giving him nothing would have been worse. So I gave him a door. Not one that opens to wealth, but one that leads to purpose. He will walk through it when he's ready. And when he does, he'll find me waiting on the other side, in the work, in the legacy, in the lives changed. They got my empire. He got my soul. Asterisk. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet. Outside, the rain hit the windows like applause. A year later, the foundation received its 1,000th project submission. Vincenzo retired, leaving operations fully in my hands. The board voted unanimously to rename it, not after me, but after the principle that started it all, the Invisible Inheritance Trust. That same day, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. It was from Grayson. "Hey, man. Heard you're doing some charity work or something? Maybe I could help. Trying to clean up my image." I read it, smiled, and put the phone down. Some doors aren't meant to reopen. The last page of my grandfather's journal said, "They will measure my success by the buildings that bear my name. But Evan's legacy will breathe, in classrooms, in laughter, in hope. The money I made will vanish. The lives he touches will not." He was right. Every day I walk into my classroom, I see those lives. And sometimes, when I stand at the board, explaining chemical bonds or atomic energy, I imagine him, not the empire builder, but the quiet man on that Amalfi balcony, watching, finally at peace. So yes, my cousins got their millions. They got yachts and mansions, headlines and chaos. I got a plane ticket. And a crumpled envelope that led me to purpose. Turns out, that's the only inheritance that truly counts. Would you have taken that flight if you were in my shoes? Tell me in the comments below, I want to hear your thoughts. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications.